Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into a place we have not been in a long time. And yeah, the place is kind of back to a wreck again. We had to do all the painting here, rejig it, put a new door on, new frame out for a door and all that. We finally reached the point where we have a little room to breathe. We got the RV, we just got some time to kill before it's got to be taken in tomorrow for its grand checkout for safety. So what better time than now to get caught up a little bit on the hi-fi stereo and the new adventures in stereo listening experience. One of the things that I put up back in April was a video featuring the unit. I don't even know where in the heck I put it here. The unit I call Little Toot. And pardon my back here. We had a lot of fun with the little 1 amp stereo amplifier, the tube amplifier from 1959, the True Test Stereo 5. And since that time, I've had people clamoring for more tube audio gear, more tube amplifiers and stuff. So I thought today we would break it up a little bit, the usual routine of what's going on here. We would sit Little Toot aside, and we'll go ahead today and we're going to do some work, or little explaining actually, on this really nice homemade tube amplifier here that is stereo. And one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to get into a little theory very lightly here of what made a tube amplifier work. We have transistors today, we have solid state. This is obviously old and obsolete technology. It's old and obsolete for a reason, because it was used a lot, consumed a lot of power, and it produced a lot of heat. This is why the old TV stations, radio stations, had to have tremendous fans and cooling systems and air conditioning to dissipate the heat that tubes produce. But why did they produce heat? Well, we're going to discuss why they did that today. And we're going to go back today and we're going to talk a little bit about Thomas Edison too. So stay tuned. We're going to have an interesting little chooch today. And we're going to talk about this little homemade stereo amplifier. And then we're going to have a listen to it both inside the house and out here too. We're going to start out here as usual. Stay tuned. Good stuff coming up. You say the name Thomas Edison, we all think about one of the greatest inventors of all time, probably the greatest inventor of what we might call the modern era. And what made Thomas Edison great with his inventions wasn't so much that he was touched by genius or a scientist, it's because he was a tinkerer and he was always fiddling around with new combinations and things. No scientist, but a hell of a tinkerer. There's only, believe it or not, in all the body of work that Thomas Edison left, the birth of the what we know as General Electric today, and his assistance on DC power as opposed to the Tesla and Westinghouse, the beginnings of Westinghouse with the idea that AC power was more useful for transmitting long distances without having to put batteries on to boost the power. Well, we all know that AC won in the long run, but it wasn't a fight that, it was a fight that Edison was very bitter about. But one of the things that the only really thing that Edison ever discovered, and the really most important thing of all, was something called the Edison effect. And he noticed that when you had a light bulb with a filament in it, when he was experimenting with it, that you could hold like a magnet, electromagnet on the outside of the glass, and you could actually induce current to flow inside of the evacuated bulb. So it was called the Edison effect. And for that reason, it's one of the reasons that vacuum tubes were discovered, because when they started fiddling with vacuum tubes, a guy named DeForest and another guy over in UK, when they started fiddling with vacuum tubes, they found something very interesting. That if you put a very small signal into one side of a vacuum tube onto what they might call well, you have the grid to kind of, I don't want to get real complicated, but if you put a signal in on one side of the vacuum tube and you had a plate on the other side to catch it, that the amount of power generated would be magnified tremendously. Thus the term amplifier came about. And one of the functions that tubes do is they provide amplification of signals. A weak signal comes in, it crosses across what they call the grid, heated up by a cathode. It's caught on the plate on the other side, and the signal is boosted dramatically as a result of that. And it was a tremendous discovery that meant that no longer did you have to have big boosters and battery packs. Now you could have tubes that would provide the amplification process. And it was state-of-the-art technology all the way through the early 1960s. So we're going to come in now and take a little look at this, a very basic overview. We're not going to get in depth here, but we're going to talk about the typical layout of a stereo tube amplifier. I want to preface this as usual with my typical warning that anything to do with electronics, be it solid state or tube, you run a tremendous risk if you don't know what you're doing and you start playing with these units and poking around underneath of the units, because there's lethal power in here. You might think a small capacitor like that wouldn't do a lot of damage. That's probably a 450 volt DC. Under the right circumstance, that's going to give a hell of a flutter to your heart, and under the really wrong circumstance, something like that could absolutely kill you. So we're going to use a pointer here. We have the unit safely shut off here, and what I want to show you is this. When the power comes into a typical stereo tube amplifier, it passes through a what's called a rectifier, which takes that current and it rectifies it. It changes it into a useful current for running the amplifier here. And when after it's done rectifying that signal, it's going to pass it through a capacitor. It's going to smooth that power down, and that power is just basically like a signal coming through, right? Electrons. It's going to take that. This capacitor is going to smooth that and make that really a nice smooth, ultra smooth, non-spiky DC current. This is what they call a filter capacitor here, and that's its whole function, is to make sure that the power isn't spiking up and down, that you have a good smooth power flow coming in. Then what happens, we have an input feed here, possibly from a phono, a 8-track, a cassette tape, a CD, an MP3 player. We're going to feed 2 channels into here. And this is why we have what looks like duplication up front, because each of these is 1 channel here. Okay, it's stereo, meaning there's 2 different channels being broadcasted. Each of the channels that's coming out is slightly different because they're recorded from microphones in different locations within a studio. It's highly simplified, but you get the point. So what happens next is you have something like, it's called like a 12AX7 tube, and all this little tube does, 6AX7, is it detects the signal being brought in to the amplifier from an external source like an MP3 player, and it gives that a big enough boost that it can take that clean signal and it then can shoot it over to what's called the output tube. And this is really the workhorse. This is the heart of what Edison discovered with the Edison effect. You put a small signal into a vacuum tube, and what happens as it crosses the grid plate in here, and this is made up with a series of 1 or 2 grids in here, and when it crosses that grid, the electrons flow from positive to negative. You can get a tremendously amplified signal coming out, many times larger than the signal that came in. Then once that signal is amplified, you have to be able to output that. So you have to be able to send that signal through what's called the output transformers for the speakers. And you're going to have 1 on each side, and this makes sure that the impedance, or what signal is sent into the speakers, precisely matches and balances it out, so you don't have an imbalance and you don't burn up your speakers. So the output transformers, in my opinion, are the most important thing in a stereo, particularly a vintage stereo. The bigger the better, and the wider the frequency, the more wide a frequency you can get, the better. So we always want to pay up for output transformers for speakers and headphones that are tremendously wide frequency, so you don't leave a lot of the sound on the studio floor. You may wonder what this is. This is just a big transformer that's taking household power here, 120, and sending off various spurs to run the power to the tubes for the what they call the B+, the rail power here. It's also running power to the grid, and the grid is actually the thing that's going to vary the signal. So when you have a jump in volume, it's going to have more electrons flowing across here, which is going to produce a bigger sound. So all that does is sort of provide the power that helps moderate. And once a bigger signal comes in and is amplified, you have a bigger sound. Smaller signal, it's reduced again. So it's a whole process of taking that output and putting into a usable format. Well, that's enough theory today, so we're going to go ahead and click it on. We have our MP3 player set up here. I'm going to go get the, I'm just going to use a simple phone to drive it today. We'll click it on, we'll warm it up, we'll listen to a pretty cool song, and then we'll switch inside during the song and get it on the big, get it on the wall of sound. So, okay, see you in a minute. One thing that people love is the glow of the tubes in an old tube, be it a tuner or an amplifier. That lovely glow, there's just something romantic about that. Well, as somebody once said that evaluated a very famous author about stereos and vintage things, he said it's almost like looking at the way you get mesmerized looking at a fire when you're sitting in front of it. So without any further ado, let's start our listening experience now. We have a really cool song today. It's by Ray LaMontagne, and it's called Trouble. I'm sure you'll recognize it when you hear it. So here we go.
Trouble been dog in my soul since the day I was born. Worry, just will not seem to leave my mind alone. Well, I've been saved by a woman. I've been saved by a woman. I've been saved by a woman. She won't let me go. She won't let me go now. She won't let me go. She won't let me go now. Trouble. Like every time I get back on my feet, she come around and knock me down again. Worry. Sometimes I swear it feels like this worry is my only friend. Well, I've been let me go.
Thanks for listening, everybody. A homemade tube stereo amplifier on the wall of sound. Thumbs up are always appreciated. Thanks again, everyone.